Hi everyone. Before I start this demo, I'd like to tell you a quick story. I got into photography to have my own photographs to paint from. The end. Now that's a quick story, but there is a point there. Oftentimes, many artists don't have the time to actually paint on location. It is very difficult to set up for hours and possibly only do one or two paintings. Now, without a doubt, that is the best way to go to understand color, form, composition, everything about it. But to meet that kind of schedule, it is difficult for some. For me, it was difficult. So for that reason, I often went out and opted to take hundreds of pictures throughout that same amount of time and then have the opportunity to go home and construct maybe a dozen paintings out of that same time frame that I took the photographs. But now there is a reason why all the photographs I work from are taken for a specific reason. I have an understanding of what I'm going to exactly use that particular photograph for. For example, I'll open up this first image much bigger. It's the same photograph in the upper right-hand corner, but this particular photo of Schoodic Peninsula in Maine was taken just for the water. So when I expose for the whites of the water, then everything else suffers. All the darker colors and shadowed areas go just about black. It would be a very difficult photograph to get reliable colors out of those areas. Now, let me open up the second photograph, and this was an HDR photograph. Now, what that means is 3 photographs taken together. They were all exposed for the lights, for the mediums, and for the darks. And then those 3 photographs were sandwiched together into one. Now, with that in mind, you get excellent colors because you're exposing each range for its proper exposure. So you get a little bit more snappier colors, but unfortunately, photographically, the water is moving between each photo. So for photographic sake, I would never use HDRs unless I wanted soft moving water. This puts anything in movement out of focus because there is what's called ghosting when you're trying to sandwich those 3 photos together. But now look at the colors of this particular photograph. They are much more snappier compared to what our first horizontal photo was. For that reason, I would use this image for ideas of the colors of the rocks in the foreground, but not the water. I will use the horizontal photo for the water because it is sharp and properly exposed. It will give me a better understanding of what the waves look like in a much subtle, more detailed way. So, if you ever get the opportunity to take your own references to paint from, consider many different references and angles, focus, exposure, anything to give you more information of what you're about to paint. The more information you have about your subject, the stronger your painting will be. With that said, you may notice that some of the photographs in the upper right-hand corner may rotate from one photo to another if I'm using more than one photo for any given painting. Let's get this painting started. Okay, let's give this stormy seascape a try here. And as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, I have it just lightly drawn out. Let me get a pointer here. This will be the distant islands and or peninsulas. And then this line right here will be the top of my white water coming in. And then this line right here will be actually the top of the darker wave right behind it coming in. And then this is the outcropping of one rock. This will all be white down in here. And then a couple of rocks here and there. And then this will all be white. And then what I'll do is just mix this up with some Cobalt turquoise and then maybe a little wee bit of the Windsor blue. And then also these right in here. I have some interesting photographs of this. I only work for my own photographs, as I've said in the past. And I have some interesting photographs of this. There are really some really interesting gold sheen colors on these rocks of just whatever kind of minerals are within them. And that is, I think, what I'd like to try and stay with, because I think the golds and the turquoise would look really nice together. And sometimes with a watercolor, it's all about even color selection and the color unity of the colors you choose to paint with too. Now, I kind of like to stick true to nature, but in this particular case, we could rearrange just a little bit. But what I'll do first is I'll just go back over the whole sky with my medium grays and just mix up a stormy looking gray. And then while it's still wet, I'll go in with the distant tree lines and islands and the peninsula here that would actually then feather up into the sky just a little bit to soften them up, to keep that misty, foggy look. Otherwise, if I create a straight line there, it's going to want to jump out at me and I'll lose that foggy appearance. And then the water I could start working down in till I hit this white line, and then from there on in I could handle the white areas just as I go. And then the same thing with the rocky areas. I'll just block those in and start with my real lighter colors first, and then actually sketch in the rocks and just give hints of different boulders and rocks here and there, not have to spell out every last one. But I think this one here, the mood of the painting itself, I would like to have as the more or less the focal point itself. Well, let's get started. We're going to start by mixing up some grays, and that I will do with my brown matter and French ultramarine blue. And this will give me just enough to, and what I'll do is I'll thin that out a little bit. That should be enough there. A little wee bit more blue. And that's, if the sky is a little wee bit darker, that'll be okay with me. Well, let's give this a shot here. A little bit too red yet. Try and take it from blue down to a little bit warmer color towards the horizon. We'll see how that looks. And then remember, we have to remember that this is definitely going to lighten up as it dries. But this is almost like a toned down dioxazine purple. Okay, now I'm going to try and work in my mountains a little bit darker. I'll leave this water here for the rocks and what have you. Even if it dries out, I can reactivate it. Okay, now once that softens up, that's okay. I'll leave it soften up, but then what I'll do is I'll actually go back in and straighten out some of the edges just to get a hint. This is just a dry, thirsty brush that if it lightens up towards the opposite shore, that's okay for me. We'll leave that dry and then we'll go from there. What I might do before then is just a little bit of ragged edge. And what I'll do is I'll build up the base of this a little wee bit darker and then feather it up into that, and that'll give me a better gradation of going from a fairly dark shoreline and then just with a little bit of textures, because again, you may not be able to see it, but I can see on the 24-inch picture a lot of rocks and shapes and some subtle pine trees here and there. In other words, it's close enough that you could see a little bit, but just so it's not just a stark gray line, I'll put a little bit of color and textures in it, very subtle, but I will add it. But then this fuzzy beginning, so to speak, will get me started as to project the grayness and the fogginess of what's going on. Let's leave this dry and we'll come back to it and see how it looks. Okay, I dried it. Now I'm going to go back in and just pull out a little wee bit more detail, very subtle. Maybe just some real distant trees, but what I'll do is I'll go back over with the same blues that I used for it, but then I'll just add just a tinge of green. I'll make this real light. I just want to destroy the edges just to give a hint of shapes over there. They don't have to be spelled out perfectly. And then now if this goes to a distant shoreline on the opposite side, then what I could do is put some darks over there too. And I'll mix these a little bit darker even yet. Have my Kleenex ready just in case it's too dark. I'm not using blot paper. Let's let that dry, and then we're going to move into the water a little bit. I'll get some of this done just as I am now, but then I'll go into some speed painting also. What I'll end up doing is where the curl is, like right in here, from here down, I'll be making some just curl hints here and there of some Cobalt Turquoise, and then maybe a little wee bit of the Windsor Green mixed in with it just to make it a deeper Cobalt Turquoise. And then over in here, this is right here is where a curl is getting ready to start over. I'll put some turquoise in there, and then this will all be white up in here and to where it meets the rocks, and then this will all be white. And I'll just put a little wee bit of foam here and there and then start on the rocks, and we'll see how this goes. And I got some waves to put in here, some hints of waves in here, and they'll get real small and shallow as I go out. But this is going to be a stormy ocean. And I'll just give a hint of some waves here and there. And some white water, just leave the whites there. And that'll be just more or less curls out in the open water. Let's dry this off and get a little bit more of this water done. And then go into some speed painting. Okay, let's get a little bit more done on this. And right now we're going to put in the darker waves. I'm going to start adding a little wee bit more darker Cobalt Turquoise, but I'm going to mix it with a little bit of Windsor Green just to give me more of a vivid Cobalt Turquoise. But it is also going to be just a little bit at a time. The Windsor Green really brings out the Cobalt turquoise, make it a little bit deeper. I can mix this down with water. We're going to take it all the way down with the blues, a little bit darker. And I could put some white caps on that later. And just a real fine, some light blue ones here and there. Tone those down a little bit. Go a little wee bit darker. Some areas in here. Just a couple hints here and there. And I just try to make some transitions of some hard edges and soft edges mixed together. And then put a little wee bit of just a very subtle touch of browns right along the shoreline, browns and blacks, just as if that was a rocky shore also, but fairly far away to see. And then I could even put some hints of splashing, crashing waves over the other side. That'll be last. But what we're going to do now is we're going to work on this wave here and the crashing wave, and then I'm going to block in these rocks. But I'm going to go ahead and do some speed painting, and we're going to get this pretty well done, and then we'll stop and take a break and talk and see what we have then before we finish it up. Let's get some speed painting done and see how this one turns out. Okay, I'm just starting to rough in my actual curls of the waves with the Cobalt turquoise and the Windsor green. This is just roughing it in. I use light colors to start off with, and technically I'm actually sketching in everything that I'm doing just to give me an idea where everything will be. Then I'll just slowly refine the lights and darks by just leaving the light areas alone and going back over the dark areas with more and more layers of paint. Now please keep in mind that adding two wet colors together will give you a third color, but it will also only give you one shape. When you keep on adding dried layers of paint over each other, you'll have a multiple array of shapes within your shape. This gives you a sketchy look that watercolors really come alive. Now I'm just going into the distant water, and if you may notice, I actually got my new brushes while this painting was underway. So I'm just giving them a try here also, and very much enjoy the standard watercolor mops. Redefining the shapes as I go. Let's stop and take a look and see what we have. Okay, what I'm doing now is just mixing up my French ultramarine blue and my brown madder to get ready to put down a light preliminary wash of the foreground rocks. What I want to do is wet that entire area just so I can splash some golds into that area. I want the golds to be diffused and let them bleed into the blue, not to just be perfect round dots floating on top of the rock. But what I did was take a piece of tracing paper and traced around the edge of the rock to make a stencil so I could then pull it down and drop it back over that area and protect that area. Now the tracing paper is protecting everything else but where I want to splash. This gives me the opportunity to mist it down right now and then take my golds and splash over the blues and let them all bleed together. But now with the tracing paper, I can actually still see the rest of the painting and make value adjustments as needed according to the rest of the painting. But what it will also do is give me the opportunity to protect that area, since tracing paper is kind of a waxy paper. Let's do some more speed painting. Okay, now all I'm doing is just redefining subtle shapes and various rock formations within that foreground rock. What I will do is keep on going back over the same areas with darker and darker colors in a much more refined way. This will define all of my shapes as I go. Working on different areas of the painting are allowing my previous worked areas to actually dry enough to go back to them and work on them again. This also gives me the opportunity to slowly see how the painting is evolving, and giving me the opportunity to go back into the areas where I think needs a little bit more refinement or even more contrast to create the focal point I'm looking for. In some cases, I will actually go back in and give an entire wash to an area that will actually soften the edges of any sharp edges that I have, but then also tone down my contrast of any given area. Let's take a look and see what we have. Okay, let's take a look and see what we have so far here. I think I'm going to make some of this area down in here just a little bit darker because it's closer to the viewer. I'm going to make maybe this area right in here a little bit darker. That will indirectly make these close-up waves much brighter, lighter in value with the darker colors around it. And then also maybe make some of these areas a little wee bit darker just to define these rocks just a little bit more, and then some of them. But then I'll just leave them kind of loose the way they are and define maybe a little bit more of the water just here and there, just some darker shades here and there. But then I would pretty much call this one complete. Backtracking a little bit though, that I did use tracing paper to surround this rock so I could trace it out and then cut it out and make a quick stencil out of it and then splash gold on it, which prevented the gold from going anywhere else but where I wanted it to. Now the tracing paper works really well for just that purpose, that if you want just even specific trees or different shapes or areas to cut out that irregular shape and then put it down and then splash over it, as long as you splash pretty much straight down, it's a pretty reliable way of controlling a splash on a traditional watercolor. Now that works well too, because then that way you could actually see what you're tracing and cut out exactly what you want. And then it's fairly reliable in that sense. But we're going to finish this one up a little bit, and then we'll take one last look at it and talk about the many things that we could do from here on in when it comes to digital, acrylics, comparing the two, and again, not which one's better, but which one you may need at that time. If a traditional would more suit your purpose, then that's the way to go. If you need a digital and a digital file, then that's the way to go. But as to the techniques involved, you could reproduce the same techniques, but it's just much different in traditional, in the sense that you have to watch as the paper dries. There's different variations of the dried paper, whereas in most cases with digital, it's either wet or dry, period. And then that changes things a lot in traditional as to how soft of a line you will get, that if it diffuses way out, or if it just stays fairly tight but not quite a perfect straight line yet. And then if it gets damp, then you put watery paint down, then you're going to get cauliflowers, and it's going to lift up that paint and carry it off, and you may get shapes and forms that you do not want. But we have a lot to do. We'll keep on working with this and seeing what kind of different end results we get. Keep in mind, we could go back into some of these. This one's fairly dark now, but some of these lighter places, we could even take a drawing pen and start outlining some of the different things here and there if you want to really bring out some shapes or forms. But we'll leave that for more of like maybe a forest scene or something along those lines, and it works really well with architecture also. So let's finish this one up, and take one last look at it before we're done. I'm just going back over the areas that I thought should be darker and more refined. With this particular type of painting, I could always go back in and make some areas darker, but just to be careful not to make things too dark, because it is very hard to lighten up any given area. And oftentimes you could darken up one area to indirectly make another area lighter, but that is sometimes a little bit risky. The more important part of this demo is two different things: the importance of your reference photos and how different they can be, and then also using tracing paper as a stencil when you want to splash paint, whether it be on dry or wet paper. Let's wrap this one up. And as I said in the past, until I see you out in the field or back at the studio, thanks for watching.